Welcome to the Meat and Potatoes podcast. We're here with Austin Taylor, who is a private banker, vice president at JP Morgan, and Justin Krauss, who's the market executive for the Intermountain Region. How are you guys?
Great.
Yeah, doing good.
Very
Thanks
good.
for having us.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'll just ask these questions. You guys can answer them both. You can parry back and forth, but let's just talk a little bit about your respective roles, what work you do here in Utah, and hit on a few things that the bank is thinking as it pertains to Utah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks. And I can go first. So again, Justin Krauss. And first of all, let me just say how excited I am to be here because I moved to Utah in January. And Meat and Potatoes has been one of my core sources of info about Utah. Not just about great companies, but I learned about rodeo from Meat and Potatoes.
There you go.
I learned about various Utah state programs from Meat and Potatoes. So very excited to be here. But so I'm a market exec. I work within our Technology and Disruptive Commerce team, which is within the commercial bank. And basically what we do is we work with primarily venture-backed companies to leverage the depth and breadth of JP Morgan. So that's everything from operational support of how do I make payments, especially how do I make payments overseas, right? How am I organized? Strategic capital, and that's everything from venture debt through private and public capital, partnership with our investment bank. And then the last piece that we do, which is pretty interesting, is subsector. So, Utah obviously has incredible dynamic and diverse companies, but a payments company's needs are going to be a little bit different from a green economy company need, right? Or a robotics company. So what we've done also is we've separated into subsectors as well, so that we're not just bringing product expertise in capital markets, but also subsectors, which has been a tremendous differentiator for us. But so again, sit in Salt Lake, have a territory that covers essentially the entire Mountain West. And super excited because, as I alluded to before, I came out in January just essentially because of the growth here. We had a team. We're doing some great business, have had clients for a long time. But the growth here has just been so tremendous. And so have had an amazing 8 months here, both personally and professionally. And, very happy to be here. So
Very cool. Welcome.
Yeah, it's fun to be partnered with Justin. So Austin Taylor here. I sit in a private bank, and I think put most simply, I would just say that Justin, he helps cover companies. In the private bank, we cover the founders and executives, right? So we're the destination that specializes in working with folks who are in that situation. They own a closely held business and are needing help on the personal side. So whether it's on the banking or investment side or access to credit, a large portion of what we do is also on the planning side. We're helping founders and executives think through how to best be planning for that so that they can be focused on running their business.
Yeah. There is not much you guys have not thought about, let's just say it, over the last 4 years, let alone the 400 years, right? They're in doing this and interacting with thousands of entrepreneurs over the years and funding folks and bankers. There's a billion ways to skin the cat. I've heard of every weird way to grow your business, to fund your business, to make payments in Bangladesh, right? Like, this is what you and that industry does, right?
Yeah.
Is think through problems and come up with solutions.
right.
And it is a wild world, right? Like, it's not stodgy. Even if it is stodgy, it's still crazy. Like, all the fun stuff,
Right.
a lot of it has to be miserable, right? Like, the amount of data and the spreadsheets and all of that. But the end result is, in my opinion, always for the entrepreneur, whether they're big, fast-moving, slow-moving. So it really is a cool industry, and I could read these books about banking day and night. It's just crazy stuff. So we won't be able to hit on all of the cool things that you guys do, but you guys have objectives and goals and sectors here. So there's obviously a lot of growth in Utah. You guys wouldn't be here if that was
I
not
moved
the
here for
case.
that growth.
Yeah.
And it's not like it was overnight, right? A lot's gone into it. And as you build out an ecosystem, you need to get the scaffolding and the platform, and that would entail, like workers and talent and banking and all sorts of options like that. So quick, in your guys' viewpoint, your 30,000-foot view of Utah, drill down if you want, but ultimately, why are you guys here? Why do you guys have a focus in Utah?
Yeah, I'll start there. So I mean, this has been mentioned on this pod a couple of times in the past too. You look at the history of specifically the technology industry here, but there's very prominent ones in the early 80s and throughout the 80s and 90s, and then another few started mid 90s, and there was a big exit kind of late 2000s. Those were kind of the big marquee names. I think what has happened here in Utah, and it's been really cool to see, is the iterations from that, right? The derivative effect, where there's been additional capital poured into this market that has continued to grow into more founders, new companies that are doing really incredible things. It's fun to see how we have a reputation of, like SaaS, go to market, like Utah's incredible for that. We've now grown like above and beyond that with, additional industries. I mean, you look at some of the fintech stuff that's here, some of the marketplaces, incredible marketplaces that have been developed, and it's been fun to see. I thought it was interesting. I was kind of looking back at some of the stats, and in 2020, obviously pandemic was going on, all that type of stuff, but Utah eclipsed $1 billion in venture capital raise. And it was like, wow, like that's amazing. Like what's going on in Utah? Well, then you look at the numbers in 2021 and it was like a little over double that, right? And so there's clearly a trajectory happening here. And I think that's why, the private bank started an office here in early 2019. Obviously, Justin got here earlier this year. Like JP Morgan is seeing that and wants to be a part of it. And it's been a wild ride. I mean, you look at 2021 and the amount of M&A that happened, the amount of money in motion. And I know we've been able to capitalize on a lot of that personally, and I'm sure a lot of financial institutions were able to capitalize on that just because of everything that's going on. So we're very bullish, obviously, and very excited to be here.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the only thing I'd add is personally, having just come from the East and Pittsburgh, and I covered Columbus, Ohio, and Indianapolis, and cities, and all of them have great attributes and have developed great companies. What's been fascinating 8-9 months in here is just to see not just the great companies that we could name off, and they've been on the podcast, many of them, but the culture of entrepreneurs helping entrepreneurs. So not just, and it's a lot what Silicon Slopes has built, is this just beautiful culture of folks helping each other out. And that is, it happens everywhere, but it's been pretty profound to see the degree that it happens here, and pretty inspiring, honestly. So.
I've been surprised, honestly, like the amount of founders that have a level of sophistication. And I think it's because of exactly what Justin's talking about, right? Like they have now mentors and people who've been through it, either second time or third time or more entrepreneurs. And there's such a culture of collaboration here that I think it's making a big difference in terms of, the continued growth within the sector.
Yeah, for sure. At worst, they're frenemies, but at best they're friends, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
And they're not going to pull the ladder up after they've made it. And, they might compete on talent. They might compete on a few other things. But, if they've had a good experience with a banker, for example, and they think that would benefit somebody else, it seems like they're willing and able to give folks those introductions. And a lot of the times it's really impactful, right?
Yeah.
Like a founder or a company is just like floundering for non-operational reasons, and there's some things outside of their company, other service providers, that would be really beneficial, and it does move the needle. There's a billion trends, a billion reports. You guys have your research groups. You just have what's in your brains, right? You're paying attention to everything. But what are a few points that you guys let's just do personally, right? Like what are some points that you guys are kind of zeroing in on that you think are fun, that you think are cool, that you think move the needle?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that we're hearing from our clients and prospects right now is maybe it's not so much fun, but it's just the overall uncertainty, right? And when you think about uncertainty with interest rates and equity markets and pandemics, and wars. It is a heck of a time to be alive right now.
Yeah.
And so I think with most of our conversations are spent helping them think through that degrees of uncertainty. When do markets open back up? What should we think about interest rates, right? Even foreign exchange rates, right?
Yeah.
And it's been a really fraught few months because I think people had gotten lulled into incredibly low interest rates for a long time. Frankly, very generous venture capital environment. And there's still a lot of money on the sidelines of venture capital. But I think that everybody understands that maybe the bars have changed. And so people are really looking for what do we see, what's coming next. And look, we're not clairvoyant, right? But I think we pull together the resources that we have, frankly, the clients we touch in, whether it's consumer, wealthy families, businesses, and try to pull together a view to help inform what we see could be coming next.
Yeah. Yeah, you guys have access to everything and anything on planet Earth, right? As far as like trends and inflation rates, and all of that, right?
Right.
And I think it's a resilient economy right now. I think it's a resilient world, resilient America. And with all of that, you guys and everybody else on planet Earth still gets it wrong occasionally, right? Because that's how
I feel like
crazy.
banks get it wrong most of the time. But we try.
But at least you guys are able to like place your bets, right? Like, here's
totally
what we think. And it could be all the way from like anecdotal Series A companies being like, what are you talking about? I'm going to go pedal to the metal.
Right.
And then, some 88-year-old economist that's seen it all, like, well, no, he's not going to go pedal to the metal. And then it could be a mix of both.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I can't even imagine, like the senior executive team of these big banks, just like, what do you want from me? Like, I've got all this data and all these touch points. It's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're going to give some guidance, but.
And it's interesting, like on the consumer front, we don't sit in the consumer business, but we bank, roughly half the households in America in some fashion, right? A credit card, a bank account. So we have a lot of data that we produce. And it's interesting because the insights, obviously, after the fact are always fascinating. It's just the question of how does that insight help you, have a point of view or help guide someone to what might happen in the future, right? And the degree of shocks we've seen over the past 24 or 36 months, I mean, it's not unprecedented. And again, having been around since 1799, we've seen our share of wars and pandemics. Yeah. But I think what it's done is realize that that you can't necessarily predict the future, but what you can do is have that degree of nimbleness to know that as great entrepreneurs are able to do pivot, right? And think about, okay, I plan to do X. X isn't going to happen because of a variety of reasons. Now I need to think about Y. And that's hopefully where, Austin and I and the rest of our teams can come in to help just give a point of view of what Y might look like.
Yeah, I think that's the main goal, right? Like, yes, we have access to all this data and we have folks who are crunching all that data, right? And they disseminate that down to us. And what we're trying to do is just arm these founders and these entrepreneurs and business executives with all the information so that they can make good decisions, right? Whether or not it's, right or wrong, we're just trying to do our best to make sure that they're informed. I think some of the things that I've seen just from my perspective in meeting with these founders is, they don't know what they don't know. They're head down. They have this idea or this product. They're trying to get it out into the marketplace. There's a lot of these other ancillary things that could be pretty meaningful and impactful to them personally. You think about some of the tax planning. We call it pre-transaction planning on the personal side, thinking through your estate, thinking through how it can affect, how you own your shares. And so we try to just be helpful there and letting them know, like, look, we're going to arm you with all this information and allow you to just be able to make the best decision that you can based off of that.
Yeah. And a lot of folks, for better or worse, associate big banks, big names, big logos with, curmudgeons that have $100 million in their bank account and, they're getting quarterly meetings with their banker and it's bonds and municipal and like make sure my grandkids can go to college type of thing, right?
Yeah.
There is that part, right?
Yeah.
But there's a billion other things. And in interacting with you guys over the years and, just talking before this podcast, like you and all of your services are from start to finish, right? Cradle to grave. And I think there's a lot of startups that wouldn't know that, right? What startups need and what they want is an offering that you guys have, correct?
Yeah, I mean, that's a perfect way to put it. I think it's interesting, right? Like you look at the 4 different lines of business that JP Morgan Chase & Co. has in place, right? We've already mentioned a few already, but there's the consumer bank, the retail branches, and those are the buildings you see on the corners, and that's banking the everyday person, right? Then the commercial bank, who's banking the businesses, right? Not only taking care of their deposits, lending them money, but also giving them a lot of guidance and advice, as you've heard from Justin. And that's kind of on the Chase side. You look at the JP Morgan side, there's the investment bank who's helping raise capital, right? Whether it's on the debt or the equity side, and then also helping out with M&A. And then there's the asset and wealth management group, right? So if you put all those different groups together, and there's typically going to be a place for you
Yeah.
at JP Morgan Chase. And I would just say it's been so awesome to have Justin and his group here in Utah as someone who works with the individuals and the founders and entrepreneurs, to have a group that sits in that commercial bank who is focused specifically on tech and disruptive commerce. And to your point, yeah, they can bring on a company that is seed or Series A, and they can be with that same company all the way through to IPO, right? And so your whole notion of cradle to grave is exactly what we're trying to achieve here, and it's nice that we have the resources to be able to do that. A lot of groups don't.
Yeah.
And I think to Austin's point is that we bank something like 4 million small businesses, dry cleaner, pizza shop, right, florist, right? And then in there, and so we have products. Of course, we bank Fortune 500 companies. So we've always had these products. Part of what my team and our focus, and then Austin on the private side's focus was, we realized that these high growth venture-backed companies, in a branch, sometimes weren't as well served as they needed to be, not because anybody in the branch was doing the wrong thing, just because the demands were a little different. Yeah. So we purpose-built product set, like literally payments and otherwise for that. We purpose-built a venture capital coverage team that is an incredible group of folks that helps us think through debt structures, right? Helps us have relationships with venture capital teams. And we continue to evolve and invest, right? Like it's not public yet, but there's a platform we're going to be rolling out pretty soon to help. Everybody knows JP Morgan as I'm going to go public. I need to raise $500 million. I call JP Morgan. Well, what about the sub $100 million? What about the $50 million raise? And so our team has had to evolve because, you mentioned earlier, this isn't stodgy. We couldn't still be here from 1799 if we never evolved, right? Yeah. So our business is an example of that evolution. We had to evolve to meet the market. And we've done that with the people that we have hired, which I alluded to, the venture capital team and others who are just incredible partners, our products as we've evolved. And then even, there are things coming and things we're previewing now that we'll be rolling out that we really think are special and will help meet the needs of entrepreneurs. Because when we sit in Salt Lake, right, we're in our offices downtown, or we're in, as I said before, I was in Pittsburgh, you're getting feedback from all over the place. It's not just Silicon Valley. It's not just New York or Boston or whatever. It's really where entrepreneurs are everywhere, and there's incredible ones. And so I think that's something that we pride ourselves on, of collecting this information, listening, learning about the community, being part of the ecosystem, and then rolling that back and saying, here's where we're missing. Here's where we can iterate a bit and create something meaningful. So
yeah,
and here's where we can be added. I think one thing that's a little anecdote that I would share is, and this just shows the power of the network here at the bank, is I had a client who runs a very successful company, focused on a specific industry, and wanted to launch a new product within that company, right? It was more software driven, was a little bit outside of the box for a traditional type investor, because didn't quite fit the VC box, didn't quite fit the private equity box. And I leveraged a team here internally at JP Morgan. It's our financial sponsors group, who has relationships with quite literally over 1,000 different sponsors, private equity, growth equity, et cetera. And we were able to make, 10 or 12 introductions to growth equity investors to this client, where they were able to raise the $10 million that they needed to grow that specific product. And it was just purely through leveraging our existing relationships. I think that was something that I did very organically. I think there's opportunity and probably things to come where we can actually make that more formalized to help these entrepreneurs and these capital allocators actually connect in a more regular and seamless way.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be something that might be interesting down the road.
Oh, for sure. For sure. Because if, for example, Austin, if you're at a family barbecue and you've got a cousin that's an entrepreneur, big advantage for him, right? Just by being at the barbecue, being your cousin.
Yeah.
What you guys would want to do is make it so that people that aren't your cousins at the barbecue know everything else that you guys are doing that would be additive, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're prepared, and it might take learning, right? Like, I know how to sell this product and develop it, and I knew how to raise $200,000, and I'm going to be building it. I have no idea what happens if this thing gets sold for $2 billion. I assume I pay taxes. Boom. There you guys are, right? Like, oh yeah, you will be.
By the way, here's what it's going to look like.
Yeah.
Here's some things you can be thinking about. Here's how you can mitigate, right? Yeah. There's a lot of things to think. Yeah.
So it's a huge advantage in being prepared, right? or at the very least knowing who to call, when to call,
Right.
and why. And it again only helps the entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Because there's more equity to go around. When the liquidations happen, there's more cars sold. There's more janitorial services bought.
The ripple
all
effect.
of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Big old ripple effect. All right, so you guys also have a stereotype of being slow and unnimble, right? There might be some regulations I've heard in your guys' industry.
One or two.
But
It's a
also,
core constituent.
you're a gigantic company.
Yeah, right,
A lot of moving parts.
Right.
So surely there's been an idea, right, where somebody's like, whether it's this market, this neighborhood, this product, they've seen this trend at barbecues.
Yeah.
What is the process like internally of like raising up a new idea up the flagpole? How many layers does it have to go through till it's like on a commercial where people are getting an explanation of why this product's beneficial to them?
I mean, here's what I would say is we have, as a nationally banked charter company, we have a responsibility to not just our shareholders, but also our depositors,
Yeah.
right? That is your grandmother's money, right? That we, and a corporation's money. So whatever we do, our risk framework, our risk tolerances have to be at that height because first of all, we're, again, regulated. But second of all, we take seriously the responsibility of shareholders and those depositors. And so I think what's beautiful about the business that we have, and I will say this, there's 250,000 people in 60 countries. It's a massive, massive machine. However, the ability to raise up an idea, the ability to just bring up and say, I think we're missing the mark. What I've learned, I've been here almost 6 years, is you can raise your hand about anything. Now, hopefully when you show up, it's not just to complain, right? Because if you're just there to complain, someone's like, well, why are you complaining? What are you going to do about it? And I think being empowered to try to break through when it's just pure bureaucracy versus when there's a true regulatory or control element to it is something that I love about this firm because it's something that I feel empowered to talk to whoever about like what we could be doing better, right? And so when I hear from an entrepreneur, we're out and we're having conversations. We're not in the barbecue, although we should start hitting the barbecue circuit. It sounds like, yeah. But when I'm talking to an entrepreneur and they tell me something about they're struggling with this piece of it, to be able to take that back in to the firm and say, here's what I heard, here's the situation. Is there a way to fix this? Are we missing something? I have seen time and time again where we've adapted, and it is never overnight. Right, because of that control framework and because of the regulatory environment, if you will. But it's because we have a responsibility that we're also going to run it out because ultimately we're here to serve our clients. Again, I keep saying it, but we couldn't have been around since 1799 if we wouldn't have adapted, right? And so I think that's the strength of the organization. And I wouldn't say it before I got here in all candor, when I competed against JP Morgan, when I spent time, I wouldn't have thought it would have been tremendously entrepreneurial because, it's this big bank all place. But then I got inside, I looked around, and I mean, again, the group that I sit in is only a few years old because of that, right? So.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that as well is, you look at some of the evidences that are out there from us. We have something like a $12 billion technology spend each year. And, for those folks who are listening now, like you look at our Chase or JP Morgan online platform and, Chase really pioneered mobile banking. And obviously everyone came and followed or whatever, but you just look at that experience, the online experience, and from what I understand, the conversations I've had, it's basically the superior experience out there. And I don't think that happens without a focus and a dedication to, we need to continue to innovate within this financial institution to serve, as Justin mentioned, all of our stakeholders.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, at some point, I don't remember when, it might have been 10, 15 years ago, but instead of, your grandma gives you a birthday check, you've got to go into the bank. I remember this, you can take a picture of this.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking back, I'm like, oh, that poor team that had to like think through this and develop it and build it, right? Like, but now it's just like, boop, done, picture taken, move on with your day.
Yeah.
And that happens probably thousands of times a day.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, at
an organization as big as you guys.
Yeah.
All right, we've mentioned like the 4 pillars of what you guys do and how many employees that is, all of that. There's generally not a private bank in a city, in a geographic region, if there hasn't been success, right? Like, whether people are drinking from the wells they didn't dig or they're drinking from their own well that they did dig. It's kind of that, and you might be 25 and have a private banker. You might be 85 and you finally got there, right? Who knows? But there's a lot that goes into that. And then I think informally, there's a lot of benefit to being in that world because you get access to everything that you guys have described, right? But you're also able to pay it back, I think, with like generational income, right? Like you could donate heavily to a charity. You could become your own venture fund, all of that, right? So let's talk a little bit about like, what is a private bank? What is like a stereotypical interaction? What's the main goal with this client base, right? Because they've worked hard, they've made it, and now they get to kind of have their own goals of what they want to do with that money.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and thanks for asking it. I think this goes back to a bit of a conversation we had earlier, which is we want to arm that person with all the information they can to make what they feel like are very confident decisions, right? It can be a little bit daunting. I mean, first world problems, right? Like, what do I now do with this capital that I've just gotten because of whatever it is, an exit of a business or, whatever the case may be. And I would just say that the private bank exists to help that person along that decision-making process. Some of the things I'll point to, and this is not exclusive to me or to JP Morgan, but we want to make sure that we take into account all of a person's like specific goals, for instance, right? Like everyone's different. They all have different needs and different goals in mind, whether it's in the near term, medium term, or towards the end of their life, whether it's gifting to the next generation, et cetera. And so what we do is we use our internal proprietary models to help them think through all of those things. And then we're going to back into like a certain level of confidence of them being able to achieve all of those goals that they're trying to achieve and have money left over at the end of their life. And it becomes very interesting because to your point, and I'm going to talk about impact here, right? Like if we back into for an entrepreneur, like here's your number, right? Here's what you need to be able to achieve all the things that you want to, your lifestyle spend, maybe putting your kids through college, maybe gifting to certain charities, et cetera. And this is your number. Oh, by the way, here's all of the excess. Then that can be very impactful. Like, okay, great. Now you can start that nonprofit or be giving to this charity or helping out that community piece, right? Like it's something that I've seen firsthand and can be really impactful. And I'm never going to sit here and say, look, you should be doing this, 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 and this, because who am I, right? What I can do is say, hey, here's what the numbers are telling us based off what you've given me. And now you can have some decisions to make. So that's been really fun. In the private bank, I guess I'll very quickly just say we help entrepreneurs and founders around four main things. What does their day-to-day banking look like? Access to credit cards, checks, all that good stuff. Investments, right? That's usually post-exit, right? Because they're pretty lean before that. Access to credit, right? Buying a house, maybe getting a personal line of credit. And then lastly, and I would say this is where we have the most impact, planning. And planning I break into two buckets. The first one I just touched on, right? Financial plan, putting all of your goals into a model and turning out some information for them to be able to make decisions. But the other one would be estate planning. And I've termed this before earlier in the pod, but thinking through pre-transaction planning is where we can have the most impact. And what I mean by that is basically like how you own your shares, if they're an individual name, relative to if you've done the right planning, certain trusts to get certain portions outside of your taxable estate. In some situations, that can be hugely impactful. And so we try to have those conversations as early as we can, which is why I host events with founders who just raised a Series A or who just raised seed venture funding, right? Like, be thinking about this now because it can have a huge impact down the road. So those are some of the things that we try to do to help entrepreneurs in that situation.
Very cool. Yep. Whether it's like maintaining your vehicle or getting a life insurance policy, like getting ahead of it is a lot less heartburn than after the fact cleaning up.
For sure.
All right. So there's a lot going on there. If there's a lot of Series A happening in a market, this one in particular, then, soon enough there will be Series B, Series C.
That's right.
Forecast that out. You don't even need to work at JP Morgan. There will be exits, right? So a lot of moving parts, but based on today, it's August 2022. What is some advice you have, Justin, for Utah startup founders?
I think it's interesting and alluded a little bit back to the uncertainty point before. I'm not probably, well, I know I'm not. I'm definitely not smart enough, driven enough, talented enough to start my own company, right? So this is sort of me as sitting there. But I've been fortunate enough to see folks go public and have massive exits and frankly, just push out a new product or raise a great round, right? So I've had incredible opportunities to sit with founders. What I would say is that in times like this with this much uncertainty, oftentimes people feel like they're alone, right? And they're worried about making payroll, right? Or they're running out of runway, right? And so I think one of the things I would say is every of those entrepreneurs I've seen that have gone through those amazing sort of ring the bell type things, they had a dark chapter, right? There was some part of the story that wasn't, right? We all know these stories, right? And so what I would say is make sure that you have that right group of advisors, right? Whether it's on the personal side that Austin alluded to, or frankly on the business side where someone you can go grab breakfast or lunch or something and just walk through, not when it's the board meeting and there's a fiduciary sort of aspect to it, but when there's just I'm struggling with this part, because I think having seen those dark days and talked to folks through it's one of those ones where when the folks I've seen who felt no, I've got a bunch of people, my family and my advisors who believe in my vision and can help me think through my options. That is something that the power of great advice and the power of great advisors is something that I can't undersell because again, even though we all see the hockey stick of, just the revenues going straight up, if you look closely at that line, there would be a ton of ups and downs within that line. And
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add there is for founders, my advice is widen the network and continue to seek advice, which honestly has been very impressive here in the Utah technology market, is they are kind of naturally good at doing that. And I know I mentioned that before. This is one reason why I host events for founders. Gives them an opportunity to rub shoulders with each other and realize they're not alone, right? Oh yeah, I'm experiencing this too. What are you doing? What are you doing? And so I think that's been helpful. But yeah, just continue to do exactly that. Just widen that network and seek advice from those who've gone before.
And to that point, I think that's what's important us being here is we're in the ecosystem, right? We have 500 plus employees in the market, broadly JP Morgan, right? And so everybody's out, they're at barbecues, they're volunteering at church or soccer, whatever it is. But I think part of that is being in the community to know, to add that value. It's one thing when you fly in and you sort of spend time, and we do that in certain markets because we have to. Here's a market that doesn't happen. We're here. And I think to that point, you need to be part of that ecosystem. I couldn't show up in mid-January and say, I'm here. Everyone open their doors, whatever. You have to earn that, right? And fortunately, Austin's been here a long time. We have others that have been here a long time. And earning the trust of the entrepreneurs and the ecosystem is important. And we're going to work every single day to make sure we earn that trust and keep it and deliver on it. So
very cool. Well, this has been fun. And again, we can do a book report.
Can't wait.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
On the House of Morgan. So thank you so much, Austin. Thank you so much, Justin. Appreciate it, and congrats on the fun you guys are having, because it does come across as you guys are very, very much enjoying what you're doing. So
absolutely,
it's been
blessed. Thanks for your time.
Thanks.
It's been great. Thank you.
Yep.